Hi, and welcome to CTO Wisdom. This series will talk with people who have led technology at organizations. We'll seek to understand some of their journey of the person, in this case, Bohdan, explore what was successful, a current problem that they're digging into, and what they're seeing in the tech market. Finally, we'll talk about recommendations of where they collect intelligence for them and their organization's growth. My name is Eric Brooke. Welcome to Bohdan, who we'll be chatting with today. Hey, Bohdan.
Good afternoon.
Could you give us your elevator pitch, please?
Sure. I'm a serial chief technology officer, chief product officer. I have had 35 years of operational experience, about 23 years as a C-level executive across a variety of domains, everything from telecom, HR tech, fintech, e-commerce, SaaS. And it's been quite a journey, so happy to share my experiences.
That's awesome. Thank you. So let's get started from the beginning. Could you tell us a bit about your journey before you became an executive?
Okay. I graduated in the late 80s out of engineering school, specifically U of T engineering. And I was lucky enough to enter the workforce almost immediately. We were entering a downturn at the time, particularly in Canada. So I guess a bit of reflections on the current environment right now in the tech industry generally. But I was lucky enough to have a great coach and mentor within the Bell Canada group of companies. And I basically had a number of fairly strategic projects that I was put in charge of within the Bell Canada group. The very first project that I did actually had to do with the deployment of payphone terminals. You probably still see them in airports within Canada, the ones that are two fluorescent display. Specifically, I was in charge of designing, architecting, and deploying the data authentication network for those card-based terminals, which was science fiction at the time in the late 80s. So effectively, the protocol that was used specifically was X25. So this is all pre-internet. So again, learned a lot about stakeholder management, critical path management, project management. That was my first project. I was then put in charge of even larger scale projects like the modernization of the signaling network within Bell Canada, specifically Ontario and Quebec, although I think guidelines were used ubiquitously within other telecom networks within Canada. And finally, the deployment of equal access due to deregulation in Canada. I did also, during that time, I was lucky enough to do a Master's of Engineering degree at McGill and do some research at Bell Northern Research, which is an adjunct company or sister company of Bell Canada, which was the advanced research arm of Telecom at that one time. It's probably the closest thing to Google before Google, which is kind of cool for me as a young engineering manager / researcher. From there, I was approached by the chairman of the board at a regulatory proceeding, ironically enough, because I was one of those odd engineers that could write and talk. So I got involved in regulatory proceedings at the CRTC. And basically approached and said, I could use you, my fledgling telecom company, which was ClearNet. It was microscopic at the time. It was, by comparative standards, it was about 100 people in total. But I took a leap of faith. I really just enjoyed everyone I met at ClearNet. And there are a lot of people that thought I was a bit crazy to have this guaranteed sure thing with Bell Canada to jump from basically a 55,000 person entity to 100-person entity. But I joined that ClearNet and I never looked back. So ClearNet, in a nutshell, grew from about 100 people to 2,400 people within 5 years. I was given more of a leadership role in engineering and the deployment of various engineering projects, like the deployment and selection of the signaling network, selection of switching systems infrastructure, the selection of the OSS BSS system. And it was a great ride. So ClearNet was acquired by TELUS for $6.7 billion in 1999, if I recall correctly. And it was, again, it was a great ride. One of the things that I found on, I would say, the frustrating side within the Bell Canada enterprise, which is the ability to apply what we would describe as agile lead methodology. I got to deploy that with Internet, and I never looked back. And I also enjoyed, frankly, the pace at which things could be done. Identify symptom, identify root cause, determine a course of action, then execute. I just really enjoyed that. And interesting enough, at the tail end of that, I was approached by a co-op who had been hired 2 years earlier, named Lucas Kukowski, who had started a little startup called Redney, about 10 people in size at that point in time. But we spoke and realized that we had a consistent vision on a real-time OSS BSS layer operating support system, business support system for telecom networks. And I joined on as its effectively first CTO. Again, people thought I was crazy going from a guaranteed career within TELUS incumbent, but I wanted to take my shot at both Telecom and this time being in charge of actually software delivery. And that was an exciting ride. That tenure lasted 10 years. And I think I inherited a team size of about 5 that grew to about 170 people between Toronto and Pune, India. And again, I got to exercise additional muscles with regards to hiring, training, coaching, mentoring, organization. I was in charge of both technology and product. And I guess one of the unique aspects about that tenure is we IPO'd in 2007. But one of the, I think, more unknown aspects about Redney was we basically did that without VC or private equity funding. So very unique. So we were definitely doing things that we now describe as lean and agile before they became contemporary terms. And, we had to do all of that on our own. In 2010, I just realized or came to a realization that I'd spent at that point in time over 20 years in telecom. Telecom had been very, very good to me, but I wanted to do something else. So I met someone named Sanjay Singhal, who was an entrepreneur in the GTA area, who had a collection of media properties and signed on as its CTO. One of the flagship properties was called audiobook.com. That was acquired by RB Media, so it was kind of mission accomplished in terms of the end objective of using that. From there, I went to Ripple as its CTO. It was a short and exciting tenure. Ripple was acquired by Salesforce.com within a year. From there, I did a transformation or change into Mercatus, which was eventually an e-commerce SaaS play. Although when I went there, they had a lot of IP focused around a hardware device which is bolted onto a grocery cart. So my mission was basically to transform that IP into an enterprise-grade SaaS product, which I did. That took 5.5 years. At that point in time, towards the end of that, I and my partner were dabbling with a thesis around organizational culture. So we basically left our day jobs because we had early stage success with an alpha-based product around our company called Fortay. With that, we were accepted into an accelerator called Creative Destruction Lab. We basically graduated with a child, which was an interesting adventure. Doing 2 startups at the same time, effectively. So at that point in time, we did separate church and state. My partner continued on Fortay on the thesis of diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging on the Fortay product, which continues to this day as an ongoing concern and growing venture. And I continued having a day job, quite frankly. So I became a CTO at Quandl, which was a Fintech play focusing on obtaining, structuring, sanitizing, and delivering both open source and proprietary data sets to large financial institutions, including hedge funds. That was acquired by NASDAQ, so there's a bit of a thesis at this point in time. Took some time off after my role was transferred to New York. And was approached by Araldadix, which is a health tech concern based in Chicago, backed by European private equity. That was what I would characterize as a plate spinner. It was a great growth adventure. Top line grew by approximately 4 to 5 times. The employee base that I was responsible for grew by about 3 times. We acquired 10 companies, so had both inorganic and organic growth over that period. And again, it allowed me to, I guess, demonstrate or leverage a lot of the skills I learned in the previous 2 decades in a very different environment, PE, inorganic growth oriented company, which did have a significant organic growth component. Organic growth was in order north of 10%, depending on the feature and product base. And here we are. I left Aerodatix when my role was transferred to Europe. And I've been honestly been catching up on topics that fascinate me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Could you tell me if you what do you remember about your time from like going from non-people management to actually having kind of like engineers under you? Were there any bits that you now remember that's now something that you teach your managers as they travel that journey?
Yeah, there are a few things. I guess, interesting enough, it probably resonates with one of the first near-death experiences I've had as an engineering leader. For example, if I jump ahead where I was actually hiring, for example, engineering or software developers at Rennie. Like many who are freshly minted engineering leaders, I thought all I had to do was hire the very best people, the smartest people, put them in the same room, and magic would happen. And magic did happen, except it was a dark magic. People just didn't get along. So I quickly realized that yes, skills, acumen, the ability to learn and evolve are very important, but there's this ephemeral other side, which was equally as important, particularly if you're dealing with, for lack of a better term, organizational culture or team alignment. And that other thing is, frankly, a consistent value system. So I learned to quickly determine what the values I wanted to see expressed within the organization. And I made sure that those people were part of the selection process, the people that I believe demonstrating that value. It did take time. It definitely added additional time and energy to the talent acquisition process, but was invaluable with regards to team alignment and overall productivity, which I think helped really enabled us to grow Rennie in very tight financial constraints.
Cool. Could you give an example of like one or two values that you've seen consistently that you're always looking for?
Um, I guess what I find so interesting enough, and this is what's spun into Forte. This is our thesis that what we saw, and people I think do try and mistake personality with values. And here's the thing: I like yourself. I've probably taken every personality or psychometric test I could lay my hands off because I did not want to create Forte. Honestly, I wanted to see if there's already off the shelf tool that could use it. So I used Myers-Briggs, variance of DISC, variance of 5 factors, their even strengths finder. And here's the thing: if I point towards myself, if I use myself as an example, my Myers-Briggs persona is INTJ. And when you think about that, yes, it provides signal on, I guess, my personality traits, but does it mean anything with regards to team alignment and organizational culture? And the answer is no. It does provide me valuable information for coaching and self-reflection for me to know my strengths and weaknesses. But our thesis was, and interesting enough, Google did a 2.5 year study on this very subject: what forms successful, effective teams, and that what they found was effectively what we typically look for in the interview process: skills, acumen, tenure, personality have nothing to do with team success. What they found was what formed team success was this topic of our construct of what they coined as psychological safety. And our thesis was, my partner and I's was, if it's not personality, what is it? And our philosophy was, well, it's an underlying value system. And those values are demonstrated by beliefs, values and beliefs, and those values and beliefs are demonstrated by behaviors. So we basically developed both a structured questionnaire and a proprietary machine learning algorithm that would train itself on basically a employee pool, and that determined what we called a cultural fingerprint. But here's the thing: I was doing that manually. It just took a person week, and in the early days of Fortay. So all that, the machine learning algorithm, the intent was to compress 1 week of interviews into 5 minutes, which was kind of cool. But to get to your question, I guess value or behavior that I personally look for is transparency, candor, and authenticity. Quite frankly, I like to think that I walk the talk, so to speak. And if anything, here's the thing, particularly people that I support, I want them to feel a sense of security and safety, that whatever I say I will do, I will in fact do. And I want them to, but I also want to see that behavior manifested in them. If I don't demonstrate that behavior, how would I expect how would I expect them to demonstrate that behavior back to me? And there is a self-serving, impetus behind that. Quite frankly, I need signal. If I don't get signal as to what are the positive and negative signals emanating or coming into me from the organization, how can I possibly act on it? If I don't get, to me, the people I support are the best early warning system I have. And if I can't get a signal from my own organization, how can I possibly determine a path of resolution, address the symptoms, identify root causes, and work towards increasing both employee engagement, stakeholder engagement, and meeting the requirements of the company?
Awesome. So what I'm hearing is lead by example as a manager, and then you'll start to see some of those behaviors. But what you've also said is that the deeper research that you and your partner did helped you understand that actually a lot of this is about values rather than necessarily just personality.
Right. I describe, here's the thing. I guess the one interesting thing because we tried that, we had, so back in the day when I was an engineering leader, I would say, okay, let's try this person. Let's try this thing. Let's just see what happens. And honestly, I did not see a correlation between anything to do with personality, with team alignment, team productivity, individual performance, interestingly enough. And honestly, it was just as valuable as a horoscope. So if I went out to my HR manager and said, I need 50 INTJs tomorrow, it would be just as ludicrous as saying, I need 50 Scorpios tomorrow.
Yeah.
No difference.
Awesome. Thank you. So you've had a very successful career. Can you talk about what success looks like for you and what has helped you be successful?
Okay. I guess, I guess from the quantitative aspect, obviously the ability to grow the company in terms of obviously top line metrics and bottom line metrics like EBITDA and all that. But to me, that's kind of, in a weird way, I consider the success of the company as a symptom of something else. So yes, I can point to literally every company has been acquired where I've touched it as a C-level executive, which is nice to hear. But I think me as a person, what I enjoy the most, what I reflect on the most, is the people I've hired, grown, coached to be leaders and executives in their own right, which is kind of cool to see. I can point to, for example, as one, when I entered FuseNet, there was a team lead that literally started his own company after I left and he had left. That company was actually acquired by another company in Montreal, and he's become an executive coach and mentor in his own right. That frankly if anything causes an endorphin lift, if I reflect back on what I consider successful, it's the number of people that I've hired, and I say, oh, they're good for him or her. They and a lot of them do stay in contact, and honestly, a lot of them have become friends, which is kind of cool as well to form those relationships that last. And a lot of them have followed me or continue to ask for my coaching and mentorship, which is kind of cool to see.
Awesome. What else? So you talked about obviously delivery as you consider. You talked about the symptoms. What else would you, apart from leadership development and growing others, would you say was key to your success?
Um, I think the ability to adapt and learn. When I reflect back across the companies I've been involved with, um, and this really maybe speaks to my philosophy as a leader. I'm not a big fan of playbooks per se, which is basically I did these specific sequence of steps, and I'm just going to apply them here because I was successful in this context. And unfortunately, I do see a lot of that, particularly with unfortunately management consulting agencies, where they say, "Here's a playbook. If you do this, you will be successful." And what I found was every company has been a snowflake in terms of context, in terms of people, in terms of technology, in terms of organizational structure, in terms of domain. And step one, I think, part of my philosophy is just learn. Don't try and do anything, just learn the state and context of the company. That means, learning about the people, learning as to why they got to this point, which is important. What were the decisions made in the past? And obviously, step two is to determine a hypothesis as how to improve things. And step three is implement and do that kind of rinse and repeat cycle with regards to, yes, making decision, communicating, obtaining alignment of that decision, executing, and seeing the results. So I think that literally that kind of humility to when you're going into an organization or environment to not admit that I don't know everything. I'm here to step one, learn, and yes, I will obviously have a growing repository of experiences and knowledge to back me up, but to have the humility to understand that I don't know everything. Please tell me how we got to this point so I can help the company grow from this point onwards.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's dig into, is there a something you're trying to figure out at the moment? Is there a problem that you are kind of particularly interested in or an area of research that you're digging into at this moment?
Well, I guess when I was at Aerodatics, I was kind of supporting hundreds of people across 10 time zones. And literally, we did 10 acquisitions in under 3 years. So that was that's kind of the plate spinning aspect. So, ironically, I did not have a real chance to really keep abreast of compelling developments in technology. The one thing that I found super compelling, literally T minus a year ago, was and this is where we started hearing the buzz around generative artificial intelligence, large language models. And so basically, once I left in February, I've been honestly just catching up on the different models, how they can be used. And interesting enough, there's a new model every day, it seems. So it seems like it's been a perpetual cycle of me learning something new about generative AI and LLMs and the potential applications of generative AI.
Cool. You've been an executive a couple times. Can you share for the listeners, what's that like? How is it different from being a director or a manager?
Um, and there's, I guess, two aspects. One is a greater emphasis on a correlation to understanding the strategic intent of the company, which emanates from the board and typically the CEO, as well as stakeholders like the senior leadership team. But a strategy, if I don't understand a strategy, I can't execute well. And again, every company has been different. If I focus on the last two, Quando was focused on organic growth. And a lot of my energy was focused on how do I optimize and improve the productivity to achieve the objectives of the company in that context. And yes, we did things like automating a lot of manual customer success items to improve the efficiency of the company. We focused on updating the back end infrastructure, decoupling the front end from the back end. So a lot of things that were undertaken in that context. In the case of aeronautics, the strategic imperative was both growth, but also high EBITDA margins in excess of 40%. So that puts a very different spin on my operating parameters. So in the case of aeronautics, a lot of that had to do with, selecting and executing in the context of obtaining a low cost center, which happened to be in this case North Macedonia. So again, different circumstances, different strategic imperatives that you really need to understand in order to successfully execute as an executive. The other item, other than strategy and understanding the strategic end goals, is stakeholder management. That includes the board, the other members of the leadership team, marketing, sales, obviously, and obviously the other large stakeholder group is the people I support. And balancing all those, really understanding, actually, it's not understanding what their requirements are, what their needs are, but also providing a consistent form of communication to the board, why we did this, what are we operating on, and also the senior leadership team, because if they don't know what I'm trying to achieve, or if there's no alignment on what I'm trying to achieve, there's going to be a point of friction. So it's a lot of it is communicating and alignment across that level of leadership.
Cool, thanks. Is there any particular kind of relationships with one particular kind of role, like CFO or Chief Product Officer or Chief Sales Officer? Is there a particular role that you've had that took a little bit longer to figure out? Or are there things you can share with us that helped you set up a good relationship with them?
Well, every company has been unique. So in some cases, I've actually been in charge of product. For example, in the case of running now Optima, so I had both hats. I think that helped me understand the product role. For example, in aeronautics, I was going into an entirely new domain, in this case, self-tech. So I, at that point, partnered with my CPO counterpart, which I'm going to be based in the UK, to really understand what their requirements are, their objectives are. So I think part of that is a function of the operating context and company. But in a way, the same philosophy that I apply to the people I support, I apply to stakeholders, which is transparency, candor, authenticity, because they need to trust me, and I need to trust them. So I'm very much on the page of, if there's a point of friction, I prefer to identify and communicate what that is, so we can ideally come to some sort of resolution, compromise, what have you, to further achieve the goals of the organization.
Cool. So in the conversation you mentioned earlier about working with the board, what does that mean? What does it look like from your perspective as either Chief Product Officer or Chief Technology Officer? Yeah.
Well, from my perspective, most boards aren't particularly tuned to the technology. What they want to understand is, are things working? And are they working within the operating parameters? So is uptime where it needs to be relative to industry standard? Are your operating efficiencies operating within what they understand within their cohort group? For example, in the case of large private equity firms, they probably have access to tens or dozens or even 100 corporations within their portfolio. So they get to see snippets, and they will say, hey, my understanding is, you're operating, they'll probably say your dollar, for example, they may focus on top line revenue versus engineer for whatever reason. And my job is to rationalize why it needs to be at this level, why I need more development resources. But they're very obviously they're very strategic. They want high level operating metrics, and my job is to communicate why certain things need to happen and why. As in the case of Realdatics, we needed to improve EBITDA margins, and one means of doing that was to initialize or double down on a relatively low cost center region in Eastern Europe.
Okay, cool. So I like the fact that you explained about the cohort, that you're often, depending who the board member is, has a cohort of companies that they will understand the costs and revenues based from them, and that they will sometimes use that as a base of questions for you to figure out, are you within their operating parameters?
Correct. And again, every board has been somewhat unique because they've had different strategic objectives. In the case of, for example, Quandl, obviously, our EBITDA margins were probably closer to zero, as opposed to private equity backed that have very high expectations on profitable growth.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. What are you seeing in the wider tech market today?
Well, the last year has been interesting with regards to retraction. I guess, having been an operating manager, leader, and executive across 3.5 decades, the closest analogy I've encountered to what we are now experiencing, it kind of reminds me of the .com era from '99 to roughly 2001, where there was an implosion in investment in the .com sector, or was characterized as a .com center. In an odd way, I see some of the symptoms which preceded the current decline in tech, which was a focus on vanity metrics. Like I remember literally the term eyeballs was used as a key investment metric, which obviously didn't make a lot of sense. And I saw hints of that again leading up to 2021, 2022, and now 2023. I think one thing which was unique in particularly the last half decade was cheap cost of capital, which was effectively zero. So I think people were making a lot of loose bets, and valuations were not correlated with, sound operational and financial metrics. And now we're kind of seeing that retraction and unfortunate outcome. But having said that, all things come in cycles. I think, I guess looking positively, the increased cost of capital is focusing time, energy, and capital on organizations that have sound business models, sound strategic objectives, and finally, sound leadership in organizations, quite frankly.
Cool. What's helped you grow and helped you scale, because you've had a quite a journey? So what has helped you in those moments kind of grow to your next level?
Well, interesting enough, I guess one of the lessons learned a bit, frankly, late in my career was the realization that I did not need to be the smartest person in the room, and the power of networking, the power of community. And that has really started my, extracurricular activities, starting with the Toronto CTO meetup, which began towards my tenure at Redney. So it just began as a dinner group around, roughly a rough cadence of roughly once every 2 months. That became a fairly regular recurring meetup, which had a community membership of hundreds of people within the greater Toronto area. Obviously, over COVID, those activities were suspended, but I reinstated the meetup in a post-COVID environment. Then that's meeting in a roughly bi-monthly cadence, last one being roughly 2 months ago. And I enjoy that aspect of it because I learned from it. And, I enjoy the prospect of seeing people network, seeing those networks form, because it's what I think that networking aspect, the fact that I could bounce an idea off of someone, get a cogent response back, helped me grow as a leader because they've experienced things, they've had access to items I've not seen or heard. And so it's that power of community that has, I think, helped me. And it's partially what encourages me to continue that. And about 8 years ago, I started TrueNorthCTO, which is the pan-Canadian analog that's grown to over 2,000 people across Canada. And the one thing I think I enjoy literally is seeing the most arcane question being posted in a virtual community and people hopping on within minutes and saying, well, this is what I've experienced. So it's a combination, what I locally call a combination of professional and chill, where people can leave their hubris at the door and just help each other in a collaborative and social manner.
Awesome. So lastly, but not leastly, what do you do for fun, Bohdan?
Well, interesting enough, the communities are my hobby. Like, people say golf, race cars. I actually enjoy the power of community. And, frankly, I do invest time and energy into both the Toronto CTO meetup and TrueNorthCTO. I have deliberately, this is fairly unique, both communities are unsponsored, volunteer-led, and not-for-profit. And I did that deliberately because I experimented with a lot of things in early days. And what I found was the prospect of sponsorship, it started to distort the communication channels that are being formed and started to create a point of friction. So I made a very early experiment, decided to canon and keep it as a purely unsponsored in community organic driven event. And like I said, I honestly get an endorphin lift when I see people communicate with each other, help each other, both directly and semi-publicly within the confines of the community. Other than that, I do have a 5.5-year-old by virtue of the other startup that was formed in Creative Destruction Lab. So re-experiencing parenthood all over again with regards to a young daughter. So spending time with her, seeing her grow is been, extremely it's been encouraging to see her grow as a young human being again.
Bohdan, thank you very much for your transparency and your time today. It's been a thoroughly insightful talk. Thank you.
You're welcome.